Well, welcome everyone to the second session of our masterclass on storytelling. Um, uh, I received an outpouring of praise from the attendees of the first session. Mind-blowing, insightful, practical. These were some of the many testimonies received from you all as you sent your stories into Jules and I. And I couldn't agree more. Personally, the first session was an epiphany to me, and I'd like to take a minute to describe that epiphany. I realized that we in HPAC are writing our own global heating story, and we can build an entire global online conference around this story. And I took this idea to the steering circle last week, and we had already been discussing over previous meetings the implications of the stunning new projections of 2 degrees actually happening within the next decade or so. So my new inspiration was this critical new thought that this is a fundamental game changer for people's understanding of how drastic global action will have to be within 10 years to make a difference and to avoid the destruction of the Paris Accord. And so hopefully this realization will focus people's minds. And so Jules, there's one perhaps additional outcome of the first masterclass, which was my epiphany to take forward the idea of developing a special online conference that could take our story forward. So how about that?
Fantastic.
Anyway,
Great.
let me turn over to Jules now, and we'll embark on our second session. Jules, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thanks very much, Dennis, and thanks everybody. Yeah, I mean, I think that we don't have to be assuming that these sessions will change an awful lot, but if they change one thing for each of us, that's a starting point. You know, it's a step on a new kind of journey. But hopefully there have been more. I'm going to give you a summary of what we're planning to do today. I'm going to just rehearse 4 top story concepts that we picked up from last time, give you a brief summary of the feedback from colleagues after the last one. We talk about some key concepts today, so I'm going to introduce some further ideas into the storytelling milieu, principles, what we're trying to do when thinking about HPAC, as you were just saying, Dennis, or the kind of our own areas of work. There's one exercise today, so Ron, not 4, but 1, but it's a big one. So it's the one that tries to bring everything together. So it might just begin to answer some of those questions that you've just posed, Dennis, actually. So that's the intention with that. And then kind of open up for some discussion about next steps. And I'll finish with a couple of closing thoughts at the very end, some golden rules for storytelling, and then a couple of very short pieces to finish off. And we will aim to finish after the hour and a half. That's the plan for today. So I'm going to start by talking a little bit before we get to the exercise thing. So I know this is being recorded, so we've got the chance to go back on that. And we will make arrangements, if we can promise this, Dennis, to get people copies of the PowerPoint. If they wish to have them, we can compress it into a PDF and make sure that people have got the material afterwards if they so wish. So you can take notes, but of course, or screenshots or whatever is easiest for you. So I think there were 4 concepts really that I wanted to really emphasize from last time, and we saw that in the work streams, that the 4 exercises that we did. The first was, this is all about transformation. Story contains transformations and transitions, and those transformations echo the lives of people. So when people hear about the transformations, they don't need to be told, this is a bit like your life. You can recognize yourself in this. You can see the challenges of just straight living. are coming across in this transformation about this thing that you're talking about. So the central component is always there's a moment or several moments of transformation. The second is that we talked about actually those dynamic arcs, the narrative arcs, are up and down. They are not in one direction. We never have a line of work where we think we're going to do X and it works out perfectly. Except, of course, when we write papers and articles and books and other kinds of things, we tend to write it as if it did go perfectly. And so that arc of change goes up and down. It forms the basis for narrative, but it's humble enough to recognize that there are vulnerabilities there. Things we tried went wrong, and then we made them go right. So that's the kind of the arc that we were talking about last time. The third was about emotional connection to the audience, trying to think about how we can tug the emotional and feeling strings in people. So not leading with data, but leading with things that matter to people so that they have another kind of way of gripping the story. So we talk about moments of grip. So that's what we really want the story to kind of grip people. And we want them to fill in the gaps. So we leave deliberate spaces. We don't explain everything. You might remember me saying that exposition is a killer of story. So we know lots of stuff. And one of the things I've had to learn to do in recent years is not talk about all the stuff I know when I talk about story. Keep it back, save it back, and let people fill in it. But of course, we're guiding. That's the skill of the story construction, is to guide people in particular directions, the clever background stuff. And then finally, multiple paths are suggested. I'm going to come back to this in a little bit about this principle of response diversity, which says that we make a clear suggestion that many paths lie ahead, many possibilities from here, and the audience is allowed to choose. And we kind of don't mind which they choose. So I'm going to, of course, we have preferences, but we don't exert those preferences or state them. We say, here's a whole bunch of stuff, and it's all good. You choose what you think is the most important one of these. In other words, again, to get people buying into the story through that kind of choice and engagement. So those are the top 4 story concepts. You'll recall that we did these 4 exercises. I'm summarizing them in a diagram like this. We started with prouds. I do like to start on this kind of high note so that there is energy in the beginning, because it's about stuff that we know worked and also we're proud of. And I thought that was very nice, what everybody worked on last time. We did transformation spines. We also did fortunately, unfortunately arcs, and we had a little bit of time for enrichment, but not a lot. But that's really the kind of editing process of sharpening up the rough material that we produce, and that leads us to working drafts. And I just want to thank everybody for sending in the material if they were able to do so, because that gave us enough sense of what worked and how well it went for you last week, 2 weeks ago, sorry. So you wrote about these things. Summarizing, I'm not going to feed back the full detail of what people wrote. That was never the intention, but I wanted to find out what seemed to work for you all. So we had prouds that ranged from personal transformations through achievements, idea knowledge breakthroughs, articles, things that people you had made breakthroughs on. We had stuff on community mobilization, institutional change, and some hints of cultural, economic, or policy shifts. Of course, that's the really big thing that we want to move towards, is using that kind of range of prouds to engage in and encourage large-scale transformations. The transformation story spine explored the dynamics of change at a specific location. So we did that once upon a time, and the repetitive nature of story, where you use patterns of language to suggest the passing of time. That's a deliberate method. We did the unfortunately narrative arcs, exploring progress. And you remember I talked about Kurt Vonnegut's man, woman in a hole, who gets out of a hole and then falls in another one. So this great idea of um, uh, the arc of story is falling in a hole or beginning in a hole and getting out of it. And the arcs are this happens several times because that's life. Um, and then the enrichment was about kind of looking at things in real kind of close detail, a 1-inch frame, talking about the micro specifics of place and time, and then thinking about how this will make the audience feel. That's the kind of exam question at the end of it. So I thought that went really well, and just another thanks to everybody for working on that material and producing that. A couple of people put in their fortunately, unfortunately material in tables, and I thought I should share this because I thought it was a really nice way of presenting that particular little method. And I think what's important here is that good stories should finish on up energy, not down energy. So I think you should always finish this exercise with fortunately. It should be, if you begin with fortunately, don't end with unfortunately, because that's the kind of downer. You always want your story to finish with up energy and suggest that tomorrow something else is going to happen. That's the point about story. We don't have a moral at the end to explain it. Avoid explanation. That's buried inside the story. But this kind of table method, I think, is a really helpful way and very transferable into lots of different circumstances. Okay, I'm just going to rehearse 4 kind of concepts for today. We're going to talk about the 3 acts of story again, just to remind you of that, because I rushed through that a little bit last time. To talk about tipping points through choice. We are looking for social, institutional, economic, cultural tipping points, or in other words, positive tipping points. The language of tipping points comes from the negatives, of course. But the recent conference in Exeter and a lot of literature is now focusing on how we can, through intention, imagination, invention, come up with positive tipping points where whole systems shift. The response diversity principle, this thing of offering lots of multiple options to people. I'm going to give you 2 examples of what we've done just to illustrate how that works. And I'm going to come to these golden rules for good story actually at the end. So we're going to have the exercise at the end of these 4 concepts. Is that okay? I'll carry on. And just to show you this diagram again, which is in the What Makes Good Story paper, short paper. And just to emphasize the good story suggests there was a before, there was stuff that led us up to this point. There's a history that provides us got a kind of platform for your story, which we may not talk about. It's the great roar of eternity, people have called it, that goes before. It's the ordinary world that moves into special world of your story. It's when the hero gets started on their journey, all of that kind of stuff. So the story is that central bit. You have your events and action at a distinctive place. There's transformation. And the guidance that I'd like to offer here is come in late and leave early. So write your story and then cut that first bit hard and come in directly into action and then leave early so that people either want more or think, oh, I can see that this story is now setting the scene for something that's going to follow. The blue bits are the arc of what I call the sub-song, the emotion, the feeling, memories that are evoked by the story itself. And they're what help the audience become immersed in what you might call the flowing world of story. So when story works very well, it takes us out of our heads. We watch a show, we watch a film, we read a book, we listen to something, and it takes us out of ourselves. And that immersion makes us feel good. So good story makes people feel good. That's what we're trying to do. And meanwhile, we're getting across some kind of message through the story. So that's the test, I think. That's the kind of acid test. Is it making people feel good? Are they feeling immersed in this? Are we giving enough away to make people kind of feel as though it's almost their story, but they're hearing it from you. And then stories suggest this beyond. There's something afterwards. Um, uh, Traditional fairy tales, folk tales have this kind of "and they lived happily ever after" component. Well, of course, we never want to use that because that's the bit you leave early before you get to that point. But you might be suggesting some stuff afterwards, that futures go on, that there are many paths, and we're letting the audience fill the spaces. If we can do those things, it's working. Then we've got it. So that's the kind of central focus. Think about it's coming from somewhere, it's going somewhere. Have we put enough energy into the story to bring people in and suggest they're going forward in the story? So that's number one. Number two, positive tipping points. Now, there are lots of examples of this, and the paper that Dennis and I were involved in writing just recently, and there's a QR code just coming up if you want to scan that and follow up for the paper. I'm sure many of you have seen it already. Details a whole range of kind of examples from cultures and economies of very rapid tipping points. And I've just picked one here to give an example because you'll know it and you'll remember the circumstances. These three cell phones, mobile phones, in 2007, the BlackBerry, the Motorola, and the Nokia were accounted for in 2007 98% of the world market on cell phones. Okay, in 2000, and so they were completely dominant, masters of the universe. They thought they were going to go on forever. They had no sense that something was about to change. In 2007, what happens? Well, Netflix gets launched, yes, but also that thing gets launched, the iPhone, in 2007. And those companies think the iPhone is a load of rubbish. Why would you want to kind of scratch your finger on the thing when you've got a proper keyboard on your BlackBerry or whatever? Within 5 years, the total market share of those three companies worldwide had gone from 98% to 3% in 5 years. And that was it. The game was over. Now, it's kind of easier, it's much easier to imagine the technological shifts because there are lots of examples. In 1905, North American and European cities, 95% of all transport was done by horse and 5% by motorized vehicle. By 1925, 20 years later, it was the other way around. 5% by horse, 95% by motorized vehicle. So there are lots of examples of that. And sometimes it feels as though those happen super quickly. But of course, there's a whole before that story of building up the new technology to take the place of the existing things. There's a whole lot of storytelling that goes us into that space. So perhaps you can imagine some examples of those really rapid changes that take people by surprise. That's what I think we have to imagine with fossil fuels, for example, that this will happen really, really quickly at some point. Just as it took 50 years for people to turn against smoking in public places, and then suddenly across many countries of the world, within a few years, it becomes completely normal not to do that because the system has shifted, the cultural views have shifted. So I think we ought to be thinking about how we make this happen really quickly and believe through analogy and other examples of how quickly it can happen. Second example, quiz number 2, 6 countries. I won't ask you to shout out, but you can probably work out these 6 countries, working across from the north, Iceland, round to the east, Norway, south from there, Albania, running across the Atlantic, Costa Rica, then Paraguay and Uruguay. What is the common uniting factor of those 6 countries? They're all kind of smallish, but they're very different. You're going from Norway to Albania, and you've got Costa Rica and Iceland, Paraguay and Uruguay. There's the QR code. Ron, yeah.
Oh, I'm just making a guess. Is it electric vehicles?
That's close, but not the full answer.
Norway, I
That's
know. I'm not just,
yeah,
yeah, okay.
yeah. Norway's
Close.
world leader. Yep, yep. Very good shout. Any other suggestions?
Hydropower.
Hydropower is a bit of it. Yeah, there's a lot of this is hydropower, but that's not the thing I'm directly looking for.
Is it wind?
Um, a bit of all of that, yes.
Okay.
The answer is those six countries. In other words, what you both said there is partially right. Their electricity systems are 100% renewable. So all of their electricity is generated, 100% of it is generated by renewables. So some of that's wind, some of it's geothermal, some of it's hydro, some of it's quite a lot of it's solar. This happened through intention. And this is the point I want to make here. It didn't happen by accident. Policy makers, governments of different color and stripe, supported by the population or not so much, decided to do that. 10 years ago, Albania, I think, was about 20%. It was kind of lowish, but was on the way. And they, through deliberate policy, got that up to 100 because they wanted to get out of the control that Russia was having on their politics because of Russian gas. Two countries away, Serbia is 0.2%. Albania is 100%. Serbia is completely beholden to Russian politics because of Russian gas. So the lesson I want to get from this is countries are making choices to do this. And when they make that choice, it happens quite quickly. I mean, a decade kind of thing, not months. But what we're thinking about here with when coming to positive tipping points is rapid change through intention. And so we're going to be using story to persuade that intention, to create the imagination, to add data to it, to say how quickly this makes a difference to the national economy, because you're no longer exporting large amounts of money for fossil fuels. Now, most of the transport systems are still requiring gas, gasoline, petrol, except actually Norway, which is now 95% electric vehicles. So that they're in the second order transition there of getting the transport moving. So positive tipping points through intention, not accident. And we can use these examples as ways of demonstrating to people, well, we know these things have got to happen and they haven't happened yet. But over here are some other examples of stuff that happened super quickly. So again, transformations, that's the central kind of proposition we're talking about there. Added to this, we have countries in the 96 to 98% of their national electricity system coming from renewables that include Kenya, Uganda, Zambia, Namibia, Tajikistan. So some of these countries we may have called developing or less developed or undeveloped countries. But we might look at them differently when we think they're almost 100% renewable for their electricity systems. Now, many of them are not using a lot of electricity. Many rural people have got one solar panel and using that for one light bulb, perhaps. So in gearing up systems to be creating more, then the challenge still remains. But nonetheless, the point is those countries have chosen to do that. Kenya was spending 50% of its national income on importing fossil fuels for electricity supply, and now it's not. So they've suddenly got that resource to do something different. They may or may not make the right decisions, different question. But they've got the choices now that they didn't have. So think about, in this next little bit exercise we're going to do in a moment, think about the examples that you might know of intention leading to rapid tipping points, because that's part of our game here, definitely. Third principle is one of response diversity. Now, Brian Walker and colleagues produced a really super paper in 2023 in Nature Sustainability called Response Diversity as a Sustainability Strategy. Really, really super. It essentially just said that we should offer lots of paths and options and let the audience choose. I'm not sure response diversity is entirely the right term, but it's the one they've used. It comes out of ecology and ecosystem thinking. So let's run with that. But it's about saying offer lots of options. Now, policy and science finds this really hard because we've been trained to do the work in the back rooms and then come forward with the proposition and say, we're really clever. We know what we need to do. Here's the best option. And we present that to the public and we hope they agree with it. I'm being a bit unfair, but do you see what I'm saying here? I'm kind of making that proposition. That's what we've been trained to do. Do the work, present the findings, say this is the best option. Some of you may know of the Netherlands nitrogen policy debacle that happened recently, where just to give a quick summary, Netherlands came to appreciate the nitrogen pollution of air and water was a serious problem, that a large amount of that came from vehicles, but a greater proportion came from livestock, from dairy. Dairy is a really big part of the identity of the Dutch and of Netherlands. It's a kind of personal thing. It's why they drained the polders. It's kind of part of their story. It's why the Netherlands has the fourth largest agricultural economy in the world. I think it is, for a tiny area. And it's got, so government then did the work, proposed a simple policy. We're going to limit the number of livestock on farms. That was the key finding. One big bit of work, one recommendation. Farmers went bananas. They blocked the roads. They blocked the government with tractors. It came to a halt. Everyone was unhappy. Farmers formed a party called the Farmers' Party, which was then captured by the far right. It got members of parliament elected from rural areas, and has now aligned itself with the AfD in Germany. It's become not just a right-wing party, but a fascist party. And it's all come out of nitrogen policy. And any suggestion in the Netherlands that nitrogen should be limited is dead now for 50 years, for 2 generations. It's going to take that long because of the simple mistake of saying we're really clever, because then people then said, we don't believe you're that clever. So they might have believed the idea, but they didn't believe the people who produced it. So it becomes an anti-government thing rather than an anti-policy thing. The whole thing falls apart. So, a debacle. Ron, yes, sorry, please go ahead.
Just a quick. I did listen to a podcast on this of Challenging Climate as a, but I thought it was the restriction on nitrogen. I didn't know that it was directly lit. They wanted the farms to put in all kinds of stuff to reduce nitrogen. Is it not nitrous oxide? One of the nitrogen, the harmful
and ammonium.
one.
Yeah. It's kind of ammonia releases. From livestock waste.
So did they actually say you have to limit the livestock, or just where there are no other options of doing all kinds of stuff to the farms to adapt to
there was stuff around. There was quite a lot around the side and around the edges, but at the center of it was that they had limited area and they needed to reduce the number of cattle, because it was the amount of waste was directly proportional to the number of cattle, and in an intensive system like that, and that was the bit that everybody in the end lined up behind. So scientifically, it was not particularly wrong. It was quite sensible actually, but culturally and politically, it was an absolute disaster. So there's a lesson there about saying, I'm going to give you two examples here. We've been using these 2 little flyers in public events for a while now. So I just want And again, you can see these in more detail at a later point. But we have one called 30 for 30, 30 ideas for cutting your carbon emissions. And this is targeted at individuals. So this is not what countries can do. It's not what businesses can do, but it's what individuals can do. So it's a restricted part of the overall picture of cutting emissions. And it's to do with food and energy and transport and a range of other kinds of stuff. The key here is that we're trying to offer so many options that people can dislike some of them and still be in the game. So I say to people, and I've given out 10,000 of these in talks in the region where I am in England. And I say, could you just choose one of these this year? Is there one thing you could do? And then next year, one more thing. And there's no preference. Here's some numbers for the amount of carbon that you would cut off your individual carbon profile in your household. So you can make choices around that. But I'm leaving it up to you. Brackets. I kind of know the psychology here, which is once people have done one thing and two things, they tend to carry on doing lots more. So I trust them to do that. And if they don't all, that's fine. I'm still trusting them to get them in the game here. So the idea is to offer lots of options, but this particular point, which is to say, some of these you'll disagree with, but that's fine. I still want you to try to find something else. So in the Netherlands example, the people disagreed because there was only one option. They didn't have lots of options that seemed of equal value or that were guided in some sort of similar way here. This has been super effective at getting engagement in our region for people to just make choices and to feel as though they're moving from thinking about climate into climate action, activity, agency to go with it. We've just launched a new one on nature recovery. So doing something rather similar, 30 ideas for 30, but this time divided into what you can do at home, what you can do in your community, and how to change the system, change how the system works. And there's a scoring of the impact on biodiversity, and then 4 side effects. We've introduced this idea of making clear to people that a dot means that it could improve your health, it could reduce carbon emissions, it could lower household costs, it could increase togetherness, in other words, social capital. And that's all the guidance I give. I don't say anything more. It ought to be self-explanatory. But we're trying again to say lots of options is a good way to kind of let people choose themselves. Aria.
Yes, I just want to say I love this, and I would love it if you could share it with us after the meeting. I would love to have that in my arsenal of tools.
Sure, will do. I'll send it round, but I'll also ask Dennis. I've got these as PDFs, so I can send them round to you as the leaflet, and they kind of print out nice and easily back to back if you want to do that.
Thank you.
Delighted that if you were able to do that. The key thing really is giving people the choice, and so they might say, well, is this really effective, or is that? So you can have a conversation about each of these things, but mostly I say to people, take this away and put it on the kitchen table and have a chat at home about it. See if you can, and if I speak to young people, I say, take it to your grandparents and have a chat with them. Or if I'm chatting to an older group of people, I say the opposite. I say, take it to one of your grandchildren and see what they think. See if we can have a conversation about the thing on the table in front of you. So I'm using these as a method of opening up another kind of story, another kind of narrative option, so that people can say, yeah, we could do that, or we're already doing that one. Okay, fine. Well, what about this one over here? Could we do something different there? So this is not about being kind of perfect, but it's about opening a door, hopefully, to get people to think differently. Mike.
You're muted, Mike.
Yeah. I guess it seems to me like that's a wonderful approach for 1995. But by 2025, we waited far too long to take advantage of all these approaches. And we've gotten down to hardly any of them still being viable. So I wish we'd done this 30 years ago.
Yeah, there's
but
a
it's
lot I
kind
wish
of,
we had done. I tell you what my model is, Mike, and I get that but the ask here is of individuals, because I think that if we can get people thinking differently and thinking that they're taking action, through that they will engage with other kind of polities, with other communities, with other kind of institutions, and exert their choices in different kinds of ways. If they meet their local representative, and there's one on here that says, write to your local councillor or MP, as they are in the UK, and tell them that you want more. But I put in brackets, be nice to them, don't be horrible. So just trying to get people to talk in a different way. So this is not going to change the really big stuff, but you could do a 30 for 30 on really big stuff, which I'm just coming to in just a moment. The principle here is to get people starting to think about it at sufficient scale that they demand the sort of big change that we also know we need. So it's one removed from that. So I completely get your point, and it's a really well made one. I completely agree. I wish it were 1990 and we'd kept things at 350 parts per million. But there's still a role for individual action, for getting people feeling as though they're doing something helpful. And I think that's a good way of beginning to get political and cultural and economic change. Jonathan.
Thanks. In the developed world, what we're asking people to do is a little bit of self-sacrifice. And so what you've listed here is a lot of categories. Most of them are a small bit of self-sacrifice, a change, maybe stop eating meat or something like that, but some sort of a giving up of something. And it turns out that when people are fairly well off, the benefits of self-sacrifice are actually greater spiritually for them than the benefits of acquiring more. So instead of doubling their income, if they double their self-sacrifice and their sense of duty, that actually gives them a better spiritual payoff. And you're giving them a way to enter that zone of self-sacrifice and then to grow it each year or each month.
Very nicely put. Yeah, absolutely. There are lots of hopes with these things, where you hope that the change that we're suggesting, the agency that we're suggesting, would lead to even more kind of spread out of ideas and changes, particularly at the individual level. And sometimes you don't state them because that might put people off, but you kind of know that's going to be one of the outcomes, or you certainly hope so. So thank you. Yeah, good. Ron.
Yeah, I hate to, I mean, so HPAC as an organization, I mean, we sort of following up on Mike's comments actually, and to some extent on John's, um, we are sort of trying to promote a prophylactic, right? Near-term cooling. We're saying, a lot of all this stuff is important, and we need to do what we can. But we have sort of come to the conclusion that society or human culture or the global economy just is not going to transform itself quickly enough to avoid the worst, the really harmful climate effects that are already happening, frankly, some of them. So I think that's and the prophylactic would have to be more of a I'm sorry to, throw this in here because, but it is sort of, that's sort of been our focus, is has to be it really does to be effective. It has to be a policy thing. It has to be driven by a nation or a group of nations, or to make it really achieve the kind of rapid near-term cooling that we believe is really essential at this point. So, the story in a story framework, this is it would have to be a very a significant abrupt change in intervention, sometimes called climate intervention, by a powerful actor that would have to be a nation or a group of nations, I believe, to make this really be effective. So it's, and we actually have this, I don't know, Jules, if you're aware, but we've had this sort of ongoing debate with the tipping point community.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
you are aware of that. Yeah. So it's part of that, like, yeah, this is great stuff, and getting a social tipping point would be great, but really, guys, get realistic.
Yeah. Have we got the time for that?
Yeah.
I get that. And
Yeah.
I what I'd like to, Seb, let me come to you in just a moment. What I'd like you to do is just hold your skepticism there for a moment or two, because we'll just feed that into the next exercise in a moment when I hand back to you. I'm trying to illustrate a principle of offering lots of options into a particular space. So that might be offering options into a policy space, or to a business, or to an institution engaged in this. But I also have a model in my mind of saying the more public support you have for what you're trying to do, the stronger and more resilient will be the policy that comes out of that. So those 6 countries that I gave you examples of had very considerable public support for the shift to renewables, to 100% renewables within the countries. They had done that work, and they had made those kind of choices. So I think that having that support is certainly not going to be damaging. But you might be able to one might be able to imagine circumstances where this big kind of global change can happen without much public support. I suspect it needs more, but that's a kind of open question at the moment. But I'm just trying to kind of make this suggestion that story is opening up our suggestions and ideas, and I'm going to give you a little kind of framer for that just in a moment. So hold that. But yeah, no, I'm not in disagreement with you at all. I understand that fully. Sev, yeah, please do go ahead. You're just muted.
Jules, in a sense, some of us have already done a 16 by 30 in our direct cooling peer-reviewed academic paper. So we could maybe update that a little bit, add a few things, maybe throw a few things off, and come to something like maybe a 15 by 30 to give people 15 choices. Your horizontal headings would be a little bit different, because they're mainly at regional or global scale, and therefore communities or nations, not otherwise. But we've already got a long way along it.
Yeah, very good. Okay, hold that thought for a moment, because I think that we can expand that in just a moment. So I'm now going to move I'm going to come back to the golden rules for storytelling. Now I'm handing back to you guys for an exercise. So this is the beginning of fleshing out the next bit of the story side of things. And what I'm calling this is tell us something good. Okay. I've got a list of 19 gigaton projects, ones that will make gigaton size changes. And what I'd like to ask you to do, it's got to come on the next slide. So I've got to flip between the next one and the instructions. So I'll just go through this first of all, is ask you to choose one to work on. List 3 known or existing prouds associated with the one you've chosen. Do a fortunately, unfortunately table to describe how we've come to this point, and then suggest some ideas for progress. I'm saying 5 pathways, but if there are 2 or 3, that's fine. But we don't need more than 5. So you'll get a sense of this. So the way I've framed this is, rather than, and Seb, your point is really well made, because you could do this on cooling projects, as you said. But I've framed it like this and said, let's think of kind of major gigaton projects. And there are more available than we've got listed here, but I wanted to give a kind of selection of them, and to say, if we throw the net quite wide here, and include the climate engineering within this wide net, then we can begin to tell stories about a whole range of things that are happening, could happen more, are certainly going to continue to happen. Brackets, they may not be enough. That's kind of part of the story here. But there's lots of interesting things happening. That's the kind of central component. On land and sea, on energy, on urban, on food, analog meats are clearly got the potential to close to eliminate intensive livestock worldwide. I think this kind of, I think that's very possible. That would be a pretty big gigaton project if that happened. So I'm throwing this wide. There are 19 kind of ideas here. You could probably think of some others, and you can certainly think that some of these are less effective, not quick enough, will deliver only small amounts, or will deliver large amounts if they work well, could cost a lot, could have side effects that people wouldn't agree to, or actually are pretty well advanced. A lot of work on soil regeneration, regreening with trees. Dennis, your previous work, some of the energy stuff, as we've already mentioned, some just kind of starting off. So what I would like to try to do here as a rehearsal for the kind of, right now we're trying to do something in the space of where we're working with the HPAC agenda. Let's throw it wide, first of all, and then frame the options within that kind of wider scale. Now, this is not to undermine the pace of change that's required. The concerns that it's not going to be fast enough, as we've already said, that the temperatures are going too fast. But the instruction that I'd like to give would be this. Let's use the story methods. If I could ask you to pick one of these, and then when we've done the exercise, when you've finished, you can hit the hands up or the thumb up to say that you've done that one. You could try another one as well. So using what we know, pick one and write 3 prouds about it. Quickly sketch out the fortunately, unfortunately table, finishing with fortunately, and suggest immediate pathways from here. So it would be nice if you could pick ones that scanned across the area here, because I'll ask for some kind of suggestions and feedback, because we're just trying to create a language here that could work. Earlier in the year, Dennis, you told us about it was the Merlin exercise, wasn't it, where you did the backcasting. So I'm not asking you to backcast. I'm asking you to go with where we are now, what we know now. Of course, we're hoping for implementation on perhaps all of these at a much larger scale. And that would be all a good thing for delivering gigaton net changes to emissions or capture. And each of you will feel that some are better and stronger and more important than others, but could I just ask you to pick one and have a go? So before that, Ron, sorry.
Yeah, could I suggest maybe an HPAC addition or alternative possibility, which is something that would provide near-term global cooling of at least 0.2 degrees Celsius or 0.5.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. Yeah. And frame it in that way is perfectly fine. Yeah. I mean, I have in my mind thinking of kind of 1, 2 to 5 gigaton kind of deliveries, but changing it in your mind to having it in your mind as degrees C would be more than that, wouldn't it?
Well, it would be 0 and going down, right? So
sure, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
All of this stuff at scale and super fast. But let's just, because we're practicing story here, not coming up with the final answers. If you could take one of these, one that you kind of know quite well, and that you could write about, and that you'd be happy just to share with the rest of the group. 3 prouds about it. Let's begin with the good stuff. write the fortunately, unfortunately to give this narrative arc of how we got to this point. Fortunately, this happened. Unfortunately, this happened. Fortunately, this happened. You could try it with the climate engineering examples that we've got here. You could try it on the ones that we kind of feel, are not going to work if you want, or some of the other ones if you know something about them. Robert, I'm thinking about the old albedo one from your work. You might want to do that. But let me just leave it up to you. Let's just take a few minutes to have a go at that, and I'll ask you to give us some feedback. So this is what we're doing. I'm going to come back to that diagram in a moment. Tell us something good. So it's a deliberate direction to this. Okay, we'll share the creative content in a moment. I'll ask you about what you learned about the narrative dynamics and future pathways, and we'll reflect a bit on how we might use that content. But there's the instructions. 3 prouds, quick sketch of the fortunately, unfortunately. Let's see if you can do 5 pairs of that, if you can, as you did last 2 weeks ago. And then suggest some pathways from here that emerge from that kind of very quick use of the story method on those particular areas. So I'll leave it completely up to you, and I'll ask the volunteers to come back on some examples, and we'll get a kind of sense of what we think has happened to get us to this point that we're at the moment. Does that sound okay? Right. Yep. Thumbs up. Great. Okay. Give it a go, guys.
Yes.
Lovely. Okay. Super. Thanks, Ariel.
Jules, while we're waiting, can I, did you just want us to do a fortunately, unfortunately, or anything else?
Yes. Yeah, no,
okay.
just that one. Yeah.
Okay.
And then think about some pathways from here, for the next step after that. So it's
what's the next one though? What?
So some pathways after you've done the fortunately, unfortunately, then say, I think this should happen. Some paths, suggest some paths from here for that particular idea. So the fortunately, unfortunately is to explore that just kind of narrative up and downness of getting to this point.
Okay, I think I did the second first. I already had a pathway that yeah.
That's fine. That's okay. No, don't worry. That's fine.
I'm one of those science guys with my
That's perfectly all right. Changing the order and the rules is fine. It's often a good way to innovation. Folks, I was just answering some of the chat questions because, of course, as I was talking, I couldn't answer them. So apologies for not getting back to all of them. And there were some good suggestions in there. Yes, of course, Brian's Phoebe has made the point that came out of MEA work for sure. Good comments from people. Good in the chat. Thank you. A couple of minutes, 2 or 3 minutes, and then we'll see where that's got you to. Okay. Should we have a go at seeing where we've got to? So could we have a couple of volunteers? Tell us what your topic was, the 3 prouds, and your fortunately, unfortunately table, and what happens from here, you think, preferably options or pathways. Anyone want to have a go? Yeah, sorry, Seb. Yeah, please fire ahead, fire away.
Yeah, I could have a go. This follows on from the ocean iron fertilization, as people will recognize that my version of it is a thing called buoyant flakes, which actually is more than just iron, it's silica and phosphorus as well. Something good about it is it can be tested locally. It uses sustainable materials and existing equipment. It's relatively low cost and can be started and scaled up quickly. The fortunately and unfortunately is, fortunately, some R&D is already being done by 5 research organisations around the world. Unfortunately, funds have largely run out for them, and the Indian government has decided they don't want to accept the funds because they don't like George Soros's idea. Fortunately, the flakes are easy and simple to make, a bit like breakfast cereal. Unfortunately, no one is yet making them at they've made handfuls of it, but nothing at tonnage quantities. And fortunately, it could be profitable for someone to start making it and selling it around the world. Paths from it, 5 trials around the world in different seas have already been proposed by these 5 organisations. It could be taken up by a handful of nations or corporates to do, using their own national waters and national approvals, and it could be pushed at international conferences and meetings.
Lovely. Super. That's great. Good. I'll just take a few more and then we'll just kind of pull this together a bit. Jonathan, have a go. Thanks very much.
Okay, so my topic is property albedo brightening through white surfaces and reflective foils. So the prouds are the original self-study that the power to cool from albedo change is the best way to cool the planet. The second one is testing and prototyping of the pigments and structures needed to change the albedo of private land and buildings. And the third one is showing others the methods and helping them to build and share the techniques. The unfortunate start off is most materials will turn darker over time if left alone outside without care. The fortunate is a few materials are self-cleaning and will stay white or reflective for several years at a time. The unfortunate after that is most industries for outdoor products sell dark products, and they'll fight to maintain their profits. The fortunate from that is that the energy costs of cooling of the houses is greatly reduced with the white materials, and this helps to offset the cost of special materials. The unfortunate from that is that people seeing the prototypes often resist the effort of having to change their property. The fortunate from that is that the positive emotions of doing something effective for climate and the energy saving often outweighs that resistance. And finally, the positive outcome is that the perceived beauty of white and reflective surfaces grows, along with the widening acceptance of their use and popularity.
Lovely. Great. That's very nice. I'm going to kind of come back with some thoughts because I just like the way that we're kind of creating a pattern here of ups and downs that allow us to identify points of intervention if you want to start changing the story about something as well, by being honest enough to talk about both fortunately and unfortunately. Lovely. Thanks, Jonathan. That's great. Robert next, and then Ron.
Thanks, Jules. I've proposed in an article published in The Hill that focus of climate policy should pivot to the agreement of an albedo accord designed to restore lost reflection of sunlight from the Earth. Such an accord, modelled on the Montreal Protocol to protect the ozone layer, would restore the rapidly collapsing albedo layer formed by clouds, ice, snow and aerosols in order to cool the planet, buying crucial time to solve the far more difficult problem of removing excess greenhouse gases. Getting published in The Hill fortunately helps to bring this proposal to a wider audience. Unfortunately, the level of political understanding required to support this proposal is extremely sparse. The climate action movement is dominated by mythological thinking, with false beliefs about the feasibility of cutting emissions as a primary climate strategy. Meanwhile, conservative thought is dominated by climate denial. As a result, the dominant views on both sides refuse to engage on practical pathways to cool the Earth. Fortunately, HPAC provides a forum where these issues can be discussed in a patient and courteous way, and this serves to clarify how advocacy can be made more effective. For example, the recognition that emission reduction is impractical doesn't constitute support for ongoing emissions, but rather seeks to define the strategy and tactics that could actually shift the world from its current destructive trajectory. Finding commercial allies who could support an albedo accord requires a tactical assessment in order to mobilize industries such as insurance and tourism and agriculture to support cooling the Earth. Thank you.
Super, that's great. Good, thank you very much, that's great. Ron?
Let me get my video. There we go.
Yeah.
So I am kind of following up on the last two with another no big surprise cooling example. It's not going to be nearly as polished as Robbie's, but it's a slightly different. And it's more of a sort of a scenario, sort of a future, scenario in time. So I'm envisioning that, fortunately, subscale polar SAI deployment. Fortunately, China has decided that that it must start developing SAI, stratospheric aerosol injection, to address the global existential geopolitical threat of climate change. Unfortunately, because China doesn't have too much of an Arctic capacity, in particular, if you're focusing on the Arctic, it has managed to get its ally Russia on board with this to agree with it. I mean, you could think of it, but unfortunately, from a point of view of a democratic, an effort to enhance democracy as opposed to authoritarian regimes. Fortunately, a new U.S. administration has been elected and has realized that it's either gotta get working on this, or it has to do something. It has to either play ball or come up with its own program, have some kind of reaction to this new development. Unfortunately, its reaction is emission reduction only, and carbon removal. That it still is not ready to go the climate change route. Fortunately, an obscure fellow in the U.S. Army Strategy Department has been able to convince his higher ups that we need to actually work on geoengineering as the only method to do this. And they have managed to get Russia and then to get a collaboration going with China and Russia to do this, thereby saving the world from further near-term climate disaster.
Okay, great. Good.
I think
All right,
many
excellent.
people on this group will realize the backstory for a lot of these.
The backstory, yeah. No, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, each story has a great hinterland behind it, and we're just producing something that we would rehearse in a way that we would be able to use in some other kind of context. Anybody have one final one?
If I could just add, there's different scenarios, like Robert's scenario, different scenarios that may arrive at the same, through different pathways.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Mike, did you want to have a
go? Yeah, so I took on general SAI. I don't want to go through the fortunate, unfortunate, but I want to get to where it might be going, which was your sort of second aspect of your question. And
Unfortunately, does
There's
kind of
all
open up
kinds of
the
fortunate,
space.
unfortunate. I started that, but you could go on
Go
for a long time.
Yeah, for
Something.
sure. Okay, all right.
But it seems to me it's where we get to is a situation where one loses the plausibility of the Sustainable Development Goals. And so SAI becomes the only way to try and to ensure the continued plausibility of the Sustainable Development Goals. And that ends up coming to be something that can unite both the nations of the North and the South and trying to do something about it in order to avoid the inevitable rush of environmental refugees from low latitudes to mid latitudes.
Okay, good. Okay, I get it. I don't think that was a story. I think that was a statement. I'm going to be blunt about it and say that's what you believe, but you haven't framed this as a way of engaging a kind of recipient to the story. So that's fine.
Well,
it's an observation from my side.
Well, I could go through the fortunate, unfortunate.
Yeah.
I ran out of time. There's so many things.
Yeah. No, that's fine. This is inevitably too short. So
I would accept Mike as a friendly amendment to explain why the U.S. finally got on board.
And for sure. Yes.
Global powers.
Yeah.
Well, and the other countries, other developed countries. I mean, it's all very well and good for them to say right now that they don't want to do it, but the environmental conditions in low latitudes are becoming such that it's just not plausible to continue without generating hundreds of millions of environmental refugees.
I'll run through this quickly. If do we have time? I just want to.
Yes, we do. Yeah, go for it. Yeah.
So it's SRM with marine cloud brightening. The prouds are marine cloud brightening testing in Australia is showing promising results for preserving coral reefs. Results are also allowing scientists to begin thinking about using marine cloud brightening on a global scale. The risk of marine cloud brightening is considered by scientists to be minimal. Unfortunately, coral reefs in Australia are dying because of the increasing global temperatures. Fortunately, scientists are studying ways to cool the water above the coral reefs to sustain them during the hottest months. Unfortunately, outdoor testing cannot be accomplished in areas where local communities are not in agreement with this form of geoengineering. Fortunately, wise scientists in Australia realize how necessary community mobilization is in succeeding with outdoor testing. Unfortunately, awareness programs for the local communities can be time-consuming and costly. Fortunately, several scientists realize their outdoor testing and the continuation of their program depends on the ability to start spending time on community awareness. Unfortunately, the awareness program slowed down the MCB outdoor testing more than previously thought. Fortunately, the community is convinced and now fully supports the outdoor testing. Unfortunately, research funding had not included investment and community participation. Fortunately, the scientists found more investment to replace the funds they had spent on engaging the public. Outdoor testing is proceeding and the results are promising for the community, the funders, and the scientists and the coral. Unfortunately, coral reefs around the world are also in need of MCB, and the technique can also be used on a larger scale for cooling the oceans. Fortunately, we have a model now that has worked and can be applied in other coral reefs and set the stage for doing such work on a global scale.
Excellent. Good. Great. Well, I'm glad you did that. Thank you. I know that these methods might seem sometimes like they're a little trite, but there is a kind of theory behind them, which is we're trying to get a kind of form of thought that recognizes that none of these things are simple and that we get dynamics of up and down. We make progress, something goes wrong. We make further progress, something also goes wrong. And that helps us identify future actions, which is why I wanted to tie that to next steps, because you take that, fortunately, unfortunately, and use that as the method for then identifying how do we avoid some of these unfortunatelies in future, because we have allowed ourselves to be honest enough to say it's not perfect. We haven't got it completely right. And we're going to need to do that to get the public support for some of these large-scale changes. If we don't, then it's going to be difficult because we might just go back 10 steps. So there is method in the madness here of trying to get us to think in that sort of way. That's great. Let me go back to sharing and just to kind of say these are we've shared some content, and I'm grateful for that. Thanks very much. This is what I would like to kind of leave you with for starting to think, starting to think about how we take these kind of challenges to the big kinds of change, to think about, number one, how story can help revise content and approach. Can it deepen our thinking of something? And I want to offer some advice here, which is that when it comes to story, don't take the opportunity to trash the opposition. Don't say how bad the other lot are because they don't agree with it. That's not going to work. You might save that observation for somewhere else. You might say that, write about it. But in the thing that we're thinking about story, we're trying to create this broad church of bringing everybody inside. And my idea of having these large number of options, the 30 for 30s, the 19 gigaton project areas, is to say the thing that we're interested in is part of a bigger picture. We recognize that bigger picture. We think there are certain priorities, but other people think other things are certain priorities. So we're trying to kind of create a language of kind of humility to say, we understand that there's lots of ways to go forward on this. And then the story is supposed to provoke the choices that come with that. Good story would lead us in particular kinds of directions. So I would then say, number three, how do we think we might talk about some of these planetary gigaton or 0.1 or 0.2 degree changes, cooling options, as you said, Ron? How can we talk about those that bring in different stakeholder groups whom we know we want to approach and engage? How would we use this story in a way to say to them, we've got some ideas. They're not the final ideas. This is really tough stuff, this territory. But we want to kind of open this up to larger numbers of people. I mean, that's the way I see it. And I may be wrong on that, but I think that helps to try to create this kind of broader church. I would say that in thinking about story, is there anything specific for COP and for other international events and priorities this year that people are starting to imagine and can think about? And this sort of repeats my point I made just now. How do we avoid a kind of blame game? We each will have clear ideas as to what we think priorities are. We'll have clear ideas as to why we think things have gone wrong. But how do you avoid that in the context of story? Because it then comes across as a kind of clear statement of values that can turn off public engagement. So we have to be really clever about that, about stating that this is part of a range of ideas, that these things are going to help us do this, and these things are going to help us do that, but these might be just too slow now, so we're going to have to do this. So finding that sort of language that creates togetherness, I think there's a good model there for policy change, for technology change, for financial support to get the ideas implemented. That's kind of where we're starting from when thinking about story here, is deliberately opening it up and saying, we're not quite sure which is best, but these are the options. So let's have a conversation about that. I think you get further than saying that lot over there have really made a mess and we disagree with it. Or they're just being blind to these kind of options, that sort of language. So I think we just have to find a way to be, to use the ideas of story to create some of that. Aria.
Yes, I just want to say this is fantastic. I absolutely love it. And it's interesting, when you were talking about the fortunately, unfortunately just now, first of all, I was thinking about how much more space I think it makes for people to get involved, because you've got the the seeds of hope along with the statements about the need, and putting those together helps make people feel like, okay, I see there's a need and there's hope. And so that juxtaposition, I think, is so important for us. I stumbled across a former friend's Facebook page earlier today, and got reminded of what a climate denier this person is. And it upsets me whenever I see this, but so much of the narrative is like, they said we were going to be destroyed and we're alive now, and so therefore it's all a hoax, that kind of stuff, which is completely insane to us, right? But it's because they're just responding to messages of urgency that are not accompanied by, hey, but we can do this, and hey, but there's that, so they're just backlashing against the be afraid, be very afraid, So I just kind of wanted to respond to that first, but I also wanted to respond to that question of how we include people without disparaging the approach that the majority of the world and the climate community has right now, which is that, fortunately, we found this fuel that helped, things move forward and progress. Unfortunately, we also found out that fuel was warming the planet and causing all of these, environmental problems. And so fortunately, we realized, oh, we could stop using that fuel. We could, make some changes, and we could fix the problem. Unfortunately, we didn't do it in time,
Okay.
So now we're in a situation, but fortunately, now we actually have a solution for the time that we're in. So that kind of narrative includes those people who have been banging the drum on what should have been done decades ago, and they're still banging the same drum because they don't understand that there is a fortunately on the other side of it's too late for emissions reduction alone. So I love what you're spelling out for us right here. And I think that we can really use it to create some strong stories that don't demonize the people who need to be on our side, that we can be in this together through building narratives using this strategy.
Very good. Beautifully put. Very nice. I completely agree. I give lots of talks where I deliberately go into communities and groups of people who I know are in opposition to a lot of this, and test my language and test my approach with people who are not well disposed in the first place. It's a good way of finding the language to keep them on side, even though you might feel something different about it. If we talk to family and friends, it's not going to work. If we talk to colleagues who already think this stuff, it's not going to work. We're just going to we're going to feel as though we're doing a good thing because our colleagues will say, yes, you're doing a good thing. We've got to find a way of looking at it. So that's the story bit. I mean, there's lots of other work that we're all involved with, but the story bit is thinking in that kind of way. So that's really much appreciated. Now, look, I'm going to finish with this. I'm going up. This is the story style sheet. I'm just pointing this at you so that you can kind of have a look at this in the PowerPoint when it comes. This is some guidance about some detailed editorial guidance about the opening statement containing movement, emotion, exit energy, minimal exposition, character, nature as an active agent, the 1-inch frame, and then energy pulses, making sure that the transformation bit is that, fortunately, unfortunately, that's about pulses of energy in your story that keep people on edge, just as you were saying, Aria. It's kind of say, what happened next then? That's why we pick up the book or switch on the next episode of the series, is that we want to find out what happened next. That's what we've got to get people thinking about. That there's a clear transformation and then an arc of regeneration and renewal. In the end, we are talking about that. So we've got to offer that to people as part of the deal here. If we do that, I think we get a lot of positive things on the back of that. So let me finish with this. Two little observations, and then the curtain falls. You all will have heard of this story, the myth of Sisyphus, right? Pushing the rock uphill. This thing may feel like we're pushing a rock uphill for eternity. It's that hard sometimes to kind of get across what we think should work. And we feel frustrated by that sometimes, and we feel blocked by it. But words are the way that we help get through this. So let's use some words to think about what is happening here with Sisyphus. Sisyphus was the good king of Corinth. He diverted water from the gods to his own people. He diverted it to temples and their gardens, and people really liked that. He then kind of got a bit carried away and chained up death. And Hades was really, really unhappy because there was nobody going down to his halls underground. So Zeus sent Hermes, the gods, the minor god with the gorgeous golden sneakers, who said, "Not so fast, pal. You can push this rock uphill for eternity." 2,000 years later, so this is a story that survives the 2,000 years because there are components that we understand. Life's like this, pushing a rock uphill, isn't it? So if you talk to him today, he says, well, it's not so bad, actually. It is a big rock, but I do get 3 meals a day. I'm working outdoors. It beats meetings. I don't have to answer any emails. It's in the Eastern Med. Most of the time, the weather's pretty good. And at the end of the day, the view from the summit is gorgeous. So he says, and I know what I'm going to be doing tomorrow. So we could take something like pushing a rock uphill and simply through words, turn it from being a difficult thing into a gorgeous thing. That's what we're trying to do with story. Simply through words, turning something hard and challenging into something that is gorgeous. I want to finish with this. One of the foremost and most beautiful writers, the American poet Mary Oliver, some of you may well know of her work. I've got a 1-minute poem of hers called "Last Night the Rain Spoke to Me." So if you just want to kind of settle down, I know it's 5 past the hour, excuse me, it's 5 past midnight for me here. Last night the rain spoke to me. Last night the rain spoke to me, slowly saying, what joy to come falling out of the brisk cloud, to be happy again in a new way on the earth. That's what it said as it dropped, smelling of iron, and vanished like a dream of the ocean into the branches and grass below. Then it was over. The sky cleared. I was standing under a tree. The tree was a tree with happy leaves. And I was myself, and there were stars in the sky that were also themselves. At the moment, at which moment my right hand was holding my left hand, which was holding the tree, which was filled with stars and the soft rain. Imagine the long and wondrous journeys still to be ours. Mary Oliver. That's simply what we're trying to do. We're simply trying to have long and wondrous journeys. And we're using story in a way to bring people on that long and wondrous journey with us in order to get new ideas accepted, taken forward, implemented in all the ways that we've been talking about here. So I'm talking upside and not downside. There's the tree with happy leaves at the end of it all. So if you want to send your creative content, if you're happy to share it, please send your file to Dennis, and to me, that's fine. You don't have to, because we're not going to publish it or use it in any kind of way. We didn't create as much as we did last time, but what people sent was really fab. Actually, it was really nice. There was a lot of really good thinking and good ideas. I think that I will stop there and hand this back to Dennis and colleagues to think about for the next steps here. How can you use some of these story methods to reframe, to rethink, using words to turn pushing the rock uphill for eternity, to turn that into something with a gorgeous view? That's really all we're trying to do with story. So I will stop there.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks very much indeed. Thanks for your
Let's give
participation.
Jules a real hand for not only practical tools, very useful ways of storytelling experience, but also the inspiration about the journey that we're on. You've really capped it off so wonderfully, Jules. So you've asked the question, next steps, and it would be interesting perhaps to open up the floor for a few minutes to record a few of the next steps that participants have thought of, and then we can end our session, but not really end our discussion of how we will use these techniques. We'll certainly be carrying on. That will be one of our next steps. Our steering circle will carry on with that discussion. Our media and comms team, our members at large, we will still provide ample opportunities to identify next steps and to implement them. But let's open up the floor for some reflections before we leave the day. Anyone?
Well, I just want to congratulate Jules. I think it was really excellent, and thank you very much, Jules, for I think it put us all in a different space, somewhat similar to what Dennis and company were doing. Dennis and John and Herb were doing a while back.
We were doing storytelling in reverse with the Merlin. That's what Ron was describing. I see Robert's hand is up.
I just wanted to say that clarifying a story by discussing it with other people is extremely helpful. And I think I've certainly found the HPAC email discussions very helpful in trying to articulate my own views better, and seeing where things that I've assumed may not have been clear to others, and just how to get a message simple and clear and compelling.
Very good, very good. We have Kathy Posey from MIR with us today. Kathy, I'm sure you've been thinking also about applications to the MIR agenda. That is, Jules, the work of an organization that uses reflective surfaces to increase albedo.
Yeah.
Kathy, any thoughts?
Yes. Well, thanks to Jonathan Cole for giving the example that kind of helps illustrate sort of what we're looking at, but also in addition to roofs over water reservoirs and over agriculture. But what struck me today, that I think the big takeaway is, I do love what you right at the end where you said, how do we avoid the blame game and widen the sense of togetherness? And then I have to say that I just love the Aria's fortunately, unfortunately story that really put it in the broadest of contexts for the most general of audiences. And I think that's kind of lovely, and how she mentioned that strategy, putting the seeds of hope juxtaposed with statements of needs, is a really nice way of keeping people engaged and hopeful. so that we're not paralyzed by fear and despair. And so I guess that's sort of the big takeaway for me, and how to formulate stories about all of these topics.
Wonderful.
Lovely.
Thank you.
Very well put. Yeah, super. Thank you, Kathy.
Any other quick interventions before we close today?
There's lots of nice suggestions in the
to-
chat. So Dennis, that would be something that, or Robert, when we've saved this, it would be quite useful to keep the chat comments, because that's quite rich as well. I haven't been able to keep up with them, but I've just been looking. So
Yeah,
I was going to say we're not supposed to interpret our stories. We're supposed to.
yeah, that's right. Exactly.
With the recording, I circulate the transcript and the chat. So
Lovely.
that's I sent that out to everyone 2 weeks ago, but from the last one, and that link, but that's only a temporary link. So if people want to hang on to they can get it.
We're working on it, Robert. Yeah, there was a little bit of a hang up. I didn't realize Robert had sent it, and so. But anyway, we're on it. It'll be up.
Okay, good.
We'll
when I do these story masterclasses for single organizations, we usually finish with a kind of a thought about how we create a story bank within an organization. I don't think we've come to that because we're not all in the same room, and we're sitting in different organizations coming to HPAC to kind of share thoughts here. So we're kind of double hatted with our own institutions and the representation into HPAC here. But the idea of a story bank, Dennis, I think is a good way of just saying none of this is final. This is all about process. This is all about doing something that is helpful, which leads us to do something else. And good ideas will meet blockages or will fall away when better ideas come along. We know that there's no final answer to all of this, but we know there's a process ahead. And so a story bank is not about final stuff. It's about kind of a whole range of ideas that people can dip into to use to think about how we use words to help us, achieve what we want to do. And I think that's probably the headline amongst the whole of this, really.
Okay, so I gather you're suggesting that perhaps on our website we could include a story bank.
I think there are two. Sorry to interrupt. So there are two parts. One is a range of stuff for internal use, for dipping into and using to create stuff that would then go into a public sphere. I think you want to curate that quite carefully, the stuff that then goes into a public space. I mean, one thing we haven't talked about, but I do quite a lot of work on how we use photographs for story, and what one should show in photographs, but then also films, how you create short videos that then become in themselves stories. So there are a range of outputs that we haven't just discussed here, but the thinking about story leads us into lots of options for outputs, and people will have lots of creative ideas as to how to do that. So the story bank, I think, is for internal kind of sharing and thinking, because that then leads us to understanding the kind of options and the dynamism and what works and doesn't work depending on the audience that we're targeting. So that's kind of where I would start with this.
Well, that suggests to me, Jules, that we need to have you back with us to continue discussing the applications and the ways in which we can implement those as a means of telling the story of climate change in the HPAC context. So let's extend to you right now an invitation to come back. Join us for future discussions as we gel and distill what we've learned today. Patrick?
I think that also suggests, I mean, your request was not very strong for people to turn in what they worked on today. And I think it would be better to have a stronger request there, because that's the beginning of the story bank. And no matter what stage people don't have to feel as though what they've worked on today is finished. It's the seeds of future stories that we don't want to lose. So
okay, good.
I
All
would
right,
like
thank
to
you for
encourage
that.
everyone to send in what they've
Yeah.
worked on.
Right. We demand that you all send in your material.
There you go.
No. All right. Then let's say, please do that, because it was super helpful to have that file of everything from the last one. And the intention was never to make that public, but it gives us a sense of how we can then target methods, ideas, practices for HPAC on the back of what you all are thinking. So please do turn it in as Patrick has suggested. Thank you for that. Yeah, Aria, I think you had a.
Jules, don't fail me.
That's right. Exactly. That's right. Exactly. That's right. I won't let you off your homework. You've done the work. Let's hand it in. We're not grading it, so it's fine. They all get an A star, so it's absolutely all right.
And I
What were
think
you saying, Jules?
I was going to say, did you have your hand up, Ari? Did you have a suggestion?
Oh,
Sorry.
no.
Oh,
Sorry.
it's fine. Yeah. Okay. Sorry. Yeah.
And I think Patrick, by implication, volunteered to work with you and I to build that story bank so that we can then have that product available for application. So thank you, Patrick, for volunteer. I think it's excellent. Okay, well, as we close, I just would remind us that one of the ways that we can build on these sessions is this idea of having an entire series of global online conferences around the story of the urgency of what we're facing and what actions are so important to be able to avoid the complete destruction of the Paris Agreement in another decade or so. And so that's where I will be looking to apply what we've been learning today to the storyline of a series of conferences online that can take this forward. So that was a great inspiration to me, Jules. It just came up. It came up after the first session last 2 weeks ago, and so I presented it to the steering circle, and they were very enthusiastic. So we're now well into preparations for that series of conferences. So with that, everyone, thank you so much for joining us. We will carry this on, Jules, as part of our agenda. We want to come back and review over time so that we don't lose the momentum that you have given us. And we can only say that it's been a mind-blowing opening to many of us that you have shared with us these techniques, and I think it's really moved us forward. So our deepest thanks, Jules. It's been terrific to have you with us, and let's carry on.
Thank you, everybody. Fantastic. Very nice. Go well, everyone. We'll take this further forward. Thank you, Dennis. Much appreciated. And speak soon, everyone. Nice.
Thanks, Jules.
Thank you, Jules.
Bye.
Thank you.
Onwards.
Bye.
Thanks, Jules.
Thank you.